Two people sat on a company's board of directors. They signed off on decisions, they held authority, and they had both been dead for over a decade. This is not a mistake I'm making. This is what a filed corporate document says. And behind that document is a story about a company that quietly loaned out more than $1 million to the family of the woman who filed it.
Two board members, both deceased for over a decade. Two individuals appeared as board members on a company's official paperwork. They were listed as having authority to approve decisions. Both had died more than 10 years earlier. This isn't an error on my part. It's what an actual filed corporate document states. And connected to that document is a story about a company that quietly funneled over $1 million in loans to the family of the woman who oversees it. This is a story about paperwork. And paperwork, examined closely enough, often reveals what people won't say out loud. Some context first. Daystar television network stands among the largest Christian broadcasting ministries in the country. For decades, it has reached millions of households with faith-based programming and prayer that has genuinely mattered to real people. Families have found comfort tuning into Daystar during the hardest nights of their lives. That's real, and nothing in this video is meant to dispute it. Whatever else gets uncovered here doesn't erase the fact that Daystar's reach has been a genuine source of encouragement for many viewers. Starting there matters, because accountability reporting shouldn't pretend the good doesn't exist. But Daystar operates under a structure very few large American organizations enjoy. Its parent entity is classified by the IRS as a church, and that classification comes with a specific legal exemption. Churches aren't required to file the document nearly every other nonprofit must submit annually. Form 990. That's the form that discloses total revenue, expenses, executive pay, and transactions with related parties. It's what lets donors and the public actually see where money goes. Daystar's parent organization legally doesn't have to file it, and that's simply how federal tax law treats churches generally, not a unique arrangement for this one network. So, when an organization has no obligation to disclose its finances publicly, what's left to examine? Public corporate filings, the paperwork a company still must submit to the state where it's incorporated, regardless of its IRS status. Registered agents, board member listings, loan disclosures. These records sit in the public domain whether or not anyone takes the time to read them carefully. Someone did. Before going further, it's worth being upfront. Nothing here comes from an anonymous tip or online rumor. Every specific detail traces back to a named, verifiable document. If a claim can't be sourced, it doesn't make it into this account.
Barry Bowen, who has continued that research, is the one who connected these particular dots. This is the kind of research that doesn't get headlines because it isn't flashy. It's just paperwork. But paperwork doesn't lie the way people sometimes do. Now, here's where it gets specific. Texas law, under the Business Organizations Code, makes it an offense for a person to sign or direct the filing of a document.
The filing in question. The entity at the center of this is WPXS Incorporated, the company behind Daystar's Illinois television station. Like its parent ministry, WPXS doesn't file a Form 990, but as an incorporated company, it's still required to submit periodic public information reports to the state. In a recent filing, WPXS listed two people as sitting board members, Karen Lamb and Jimmy Lamb, Marcus Lamb's parents. Marcus was Joni Lamb's late husband and Daystar's co-founder. According to public memorial records, Karen died in February 2012 and Jimmy died in 2010. Both had been gone for more than 10 years by the time this filing was submitted. Yet the paperwork listed them as active, voting board members of a company still operating today. This isn't a claim built from scratch here. The finding comes from the Trinity Foundation, a religious watchdog organization that has spent decades examining financial transparency in ministries. Its late founder built the group's reputation on exactly this kind of detailed document research, and Barry Bowen, who has continued that work, is the one who connected these particular details. It's the kind of investigation that rarely makes headlines because it isn't dramatic. It's just paperwork. But paperwork doesn't lie the way people sometimes do. A legal question, not a verdict. Here's where things get more specific. Under Texas's Business Organizations Code, it's an offense for someone to sign or authorize the filing of a document they know contains materially false information intended to be relied upon. Trinity Foundation raises this as a legitimate question, not a conclusion. Nobody has been charged, and nobody has been convicted. Whether this particular filing meets that legal threshold is a matter for people with actual legal authority to determine, not for this video. But it's a fair question to raise, and it's one that Daystar's own paperwork invites. The filing was signed and submitted by David Shura, a CPA who provides accounting services for Daystar. His name appears on public record, which is the only reason it's mentioned here, not as an accusation beyond what the document itself shows. Accountants typically file what they're given, and whether he personally verified who was still living is something only he could speak to.
That's the both and the and right here. We don't know the terms. Trinity Foundation's reporting doesn't claim to know the terms either. And what we know is that the loans exist, that they were made by a non-disclosing entity, and that the same filing disclosing those loans is the filing that listed 2 deceased people as the board members who would have had to approve them.
Where the loans come in, here's the detail that turns this from a strange clerical error into something worth genuine scrutiny. That same company, WPXS Incorporated, the one without public disclosure requirements, the one listing 2 deceased board members, issued loans to the families of Joni Lamb's 2 daughters. Rebecca Weiss's family received a loan of $780,000. Rachel Brown's family received $550,000. Combined, that's $130,000 moving from a ministry-affiliated broadcasting company into the households of the founder's own grandchildren, through an entity with no public financial reporting obligations whatsoever. It's worth pausing on the word loan, because it matters. A loan isn't automatically improper. Families lend each other money all the time, and there's nothing inherently wrong with a family-run business extending credit to relatives, particularly in a ministry where multiple generations have worked together for years. If these loans carried standard interest rates, reasonable repayment terms, and proper board approval, that's an entirely different situation than if they didn't. That's the real tension here. We don't know the terms, and Trinity Foundation's research doesn't claim to know them either. What we do know is that the loans exist, that they came from a non-disclosing entity, and that the very filing documenting those loans is the same one listing 2 deceased people as the board members who would have needed to approve them. This isn't an accusation of theft or criminal intent. It's a structural question. If the people supposedly providing oversight on $1 million-plus loan to the founder's family have been dead for over a decade, who actually approved it? And if no currently living person signed off, what does that suggest about how decisions get made inside an organization with no legal requirement to show its work?
There's one more filing worth mentioning. In 2025, a document was submitted replacing Marcus Lamb, Joni's late husband and Daystar's co-founder, as the company's registered agent. His replacement was Arnold Torres, Daystar's chief financial officer. Marcus Lamb passed away in 2021. He had been listed on paper as an active registered agent for a company for roughly 4 years after his death, before that filing was finally corrected.
One more filing. There's another detail worth mentioning. In 2025, a filing was submitted replacing Marcus Lamb, Joni's late husband and Daystar's co-founder, as the company's registered agent. His replacement was Arnold Torres, Daystar's chief financial officer. Marcus died in 2021, meaning he had remained listed on paper as an active registered agent for roughly 4 years after his death before the correction was made. That fact speaks for itself. Not the first time. This isn't the first instance of outside records raising similar questions. Back in 2014, NPR obtained hundreds of pages of court records from a separate employee lawsuit against Daystar, a case that was filed and later dismissed. Those records included 6 years of the ministry's audited financial statements, made public only because they were entered into a court file, not through any voluntary disclosure by Daystar. According to NPR's review, those records showed Daystar spent $572,000 sponso, ring a Christian NASCAR driver, and separately made a $2.3 million loan to Reverend Frank Harbor, who at the time served as Marcus Lamb's special assistant. When those records surfaced, Daystar's total assets were valued at $233 million, making it, according to NPR's reporting, the largest religious television network in the country that also legally qualifies as a church. This context matters, not to pile on, but because it shows this isn't an isolated oddity. It's a pattern spanning more than than a decade, documented by different investigators using different sources, arriving at the same underlying observation. When an organization has no legal obligation to show the public how money moves internally, the only glimpses we get come from accidents, a lawsuit forcing records into court, or a state filing being read closely enough to notice who's actually still alive. Those are accidents of exposure, not features of a transparent system. A question worth sitting with. Scripture speaks directly to this kind of situation, not about whether someone committed a dramatic wrongdoing, but about whether they remained faithful with what they were entrusted to manage. 1 Corinthians 4:2 puts it simply, what's required of stewards is that they be found faithful, not flashy, not flawless, faithful. That standard applies whether it's a small church treasury or a multi-million-dollar broadcasting ministry. Proverbs 11:1 adds that dishonest scales are detestable to the Lord, while accurate weights please Him. Concern for honest accounting isn't a modern invention. It runs throughout Scripture as a reflection of God's character. A ministry doesn't need a Form 990 requirement to be held to that standard. The bar was never set by the IRS in the first place. So where does this leave us? Not with a verdict, and not with a claim that Joni Lamb or her family committed a crime. That's not something this account can prove, or is attempting to prove. What remains is a documented pattern. Deceased board members left on record for years, a CFO quai. Edley replacing a deceased registered agent 4 years too late, and over $1 million in family loans moving through an entity with zero public disclosure requirements. Any single piece could be an honest oversight. Together, they form a pattern worth the same scrutiny Trinity Foundation has applied, and the same standard Scripture asks every steward to hold themselves to, whether or not anyone else is watching. If you've supported Daystar, if its message reached you during a moment you needed it, none of this is meant to diminish that. It's meant to ask one simple, fair question. When an organization has the legal right to keep its books closed, does it still choose to be faithful with what it's been given? That's not a question this video can answer for them. It's a question their own paperwork is now asking on their behalf. Thank you for watching The Celebrity Vault.